Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cinematic Schematic, the official podcast of the Cinematropolis.com, your home to thoughtful conversations on film. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and today we are traveling back in time to the mythology that started it all. We are going back not to Rome, but to Greece. We are here to course correct the very mid-battle movie that was Troy with the real story. That's right. Today we are reviewing Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. We're going to start things off, as we always do, have a little bit of an icebreaker conversation, talk about Mr. Nolan a little bit, and then we'll jump into a spoiler-free review of The Odyssey. And then after that, we'll be heading to full spoilers ahoy. And you ask, but Caleb, The Odyssey is over 1,000 years old. How can you possibly spoil the movie? Well, wouldn't you know it, Christopher Nolan figured out how to make that a thing. Now, joining me today, he is the only man that I would go on a boat ride with for hundreds of miles into the unknown. He's my co-host and award-winning Oklahoma filmmaker. He has not been snatched up by the Cyclops just yet. Laron Chapman, welcome back.
I'm so excited to talk about this movie. It has been obviously many, many, many years in the making, and the hype was so real for this. And my gosh, what he's accomplished here is pretty remarkable. But not to tip my hat, too much. But yes, I'm very excited to be here and finally talking about what the hell this thing is that Christopher Nolan just had to make in the year of our Lord 2026.
Central question for this podcast. Christopher Nolan could have made any movie after Oppenheimer. Why make The Odyssey right now? We'll talk about that more later. But before we get there, I want to welcome our next guest. This is a man we picked up. We are on our own Odyssey of sorts on the way to this review. But what's exciting is when another man, he doesn't wear a cape. No, he wears armor. He's a fellow traveler. He's got the sword ready to go. And he says, I will step up and review Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey at a moment's notice. Daniel Bokemper, Vice President of the Oklahoma Film Critics Circle, contributor here at the Cinematropolis, flickattack.com. Dan, welcome back.
Yeah, happy to be here again. I might not be the one who hops on the ship with you when you start that hundreds of mile journey, but you will inevitably run into me.
Yes.
And
does that mean you're does that mean you're a trial then? Is Dan actually a trial on the way?
I am the Cinematropolis's Cyclops, I think.
Figured.
I think
that
I'm
makes sense.
fair to say I'm at least that.
Lots to talk about there. Before we get to that conversation, though, we are now on YouTube, of course. Hopefully you're watching this on video. Video also available on Spotify. If you want to support the show in any way, help us get discovered by more listeners like you. If you want to help us fight the trolls, because I've had a lot of shit posting on my other video, my initial video reaction to this movie, you can head to YouTube, the Cinematropolis. Give us a subscribe, like, ring the bell so you get notified when new episodes come out. Comment below. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and give us a rating and a review. Let's kick things off with our icebreaker section, though. Let's start. Well, Dan, you've never reviewed a Christopher Nolan movie. Laron and I have done Oppenheimer together. I believe I did Tenet with the Burns brothers way back during the COVID times. I have written reviews for previous Christopher Nolan films. This is the first for you, though. So I want to ask you, Dan, why has Christopher Nolan become such a massively appealing filmmaker to mainstream audiences, especially when you think about how we're in an era where, or at least the last decade, where IP has reigned supreme? What's your take here, Dan?
Yeah, and it is kind of a interesting question just because it's like there are a lot of filmmakers that we gravitate towards. And so what I'm about to say in that, he has such a particular tone about him. So his movies do feel similar despite how different they can be. There is like this consistency that I feel like has always felt grandiose, that at the same time very grounded. And so I feel like a lot of his films are very, very intimate. They're edited in such a quick way that he does feel like someone else who makes a huge mark that you can basically sell a movie off of the director alone, because he is at that level. And that would be like a Tarantino, I guess, or a Scorsese. I almost question if like Spielberg even, I haven't watched Disclosure Day.
Disclosure Day didn't make this much money in its opening weekend. I'll tell you that much.
that's what I mean. And so it's like he's almost beyond that. So he has such that that noticeable mark. I think with the movie growing crowd, I think between like The Dark Knight, especially, Inception as well, but I think The Dark Knight was all kind of on the superhero train and probably did it best in that era before, the MCU was really a thing, and or it was just getting started. So I think like just having the zeitgeist at the right time, but also just having that kind of distinct style. And again, that sense of grandeur that he really brings to the movies. It's like, you better go see Christopher Nolan in IMAX. Like or at least in some kind of like premiere format. And I don't know of too many directors who like, as many as I like, and as many as I like better than Christopher Nolan, can kind of demand that like you have to go to the theater to see that, even for people who aren't going to do that anyway, for other directors like us, like really even outside of
Daniel, the only way you should be seeing the Odyssey is in 70mm IMAX, the way Christopher Nolan intended. But even that, the thing that's interesting about Christopher Nolan though is like even that joke. I've been making that with people around me. Like that's a meme. Even like going to see his movie in 70mm IMAX, because it's so hard to do because there's so few theaters can do it, has been kind of a joke about how he has developed this almost cult-like following, right?
And he's had a cultural impact. Like
Yes.
his style, who he is, what his films are and what they contain, whether or not you like them, they're incredibly accessible. You know what they are. It's just one of those very pervasive filmmakers. I mean, like again, like Spielberg with like Jaws at the time. I definitely think he's, pretty much that, like in terms of recognition.
Because I know there's a lot of people who are not on the Chris Nolan wagon, people I respect. Yep. And it's not saying that all his movies are perfect, but I think it's really hard to deny that he produces like cinematic images that just will live on long past his lifetime. Like he has, I can think of like 5 or 6 just moments or shots in some of his movies that are really like, when you think about cinema and the 21st century, Christopher Nolan produced those, and they will be long after he's gone. They'll be like, remember that shot in Dunkirk with the plane that's just kind of like flying over the beach? Remember the Inception hallway spin? Remember when Batman flipped the truck in The Dark Knight? Like those are all iconic moments that I really think are going to live in cinema history. For as long as we have the media. Laron, what do you think about Mr. Nolan?
Yeah, he eventizes his movies. Every one of his movies that comes out feels like an event. Like people were excited about Oppenheimer, people who don't even care about biopics, people who don't, because they know that Christopher Nolan is going to elevate it to such a scope and a degree. And I think that there's something about the way he's able to have a kind of to appeal to, like, have a commercial appeal, but to kind of still keep an indie sensibility about him. And I think that's because he comes from that root. It's like that's how he tells his stories. Obviously, he's a magician and like in terms of the way he tries to play with linear time. He even finds ways to kind of play with time in the way that is kind of a reoccurring theme in his other movies, like Inception. And finds a way to still have his signatures in those movies. But I think that's what it is like he's someone that appeals to both camps. There are people who say, I don't like commercially made movies. I only like indie movies. But Christopher Nolan may be the exception for them because he finds a way to fuse those two things in a way where we can still have big blockbuster movies, but they don't have to be empty, airheaded, you know what I mean? Like formulaic and all these different things. We can still give them weight, but also, tell a good story, even if it's a story we've heard a million times, you haven't heard it the way that Christopher Nolan wants to interpret it, and so he found new things to explore in this same text that is ancient, so so I feel like that's what's appealing is he appeals to both sides of the coin.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, he just I think everything you've said is correct. I think just a little bit of historical context on how he got in this position is noteworthy too. It's really kind of a lightning in the bottle situation. And looking back, it's easy to say that in hindsight, what he was able to do was very smart in how he crafted his career. You could not just mimic Christopher Nolan's career. He is a very unique individual who came into the space of studio filmmaking at a time, and he made Dark Knight before there was all this pressure to make superhero movies, and then was able to leverage his success with the superhero movies to make independent-minded blockbusters, as Laron said.
And I'd argue he and Sam Raimi at the time were the only ones to really legitimize comic book movies. People really kind of saw them as kiddie fare or adult, maybe even family friendly kind of, oh, that's for kids, but he made them movies like, that were serious to actual auteurs and filmmakers, like who were able to look at a Batman movie and say, oh, we're talking about capitalism. We're talking about, all these different subject matters that may have been in those other ones, but not in the way that he's pronounced them. So I feel like he's able to ground things in a way for the layman to enjoy and ingest his stuff without dumbing down the material. You know what I mean? Like, so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. His movies contain all the spectacle. You could watch any of his movies and be like, oh, here's these 10 cool moments. That was so fun if you're into that. But also, if you want to walk away with more things to think about, you will get that from a Christopher Nolan movie. And the last thing I'd say is he's been very intentional and good at leaving you with a lot of really thoughtful questions to be asking yourself when the movie's done. So not only are you, wow, that was a good time, you're thinking about the movies when it's done. Well, what did he mean by this? What was the point of that? And then you're talking to friends. And frankly, most of his movies generally are like, well, I kind of need to see that again before I can really fully wrap my head around how I feel about it, because there's enough information you get that will color your next viewing by the end of the movie. So he's just a really unique filmmaker with unique sensibilities who, is kind of a one of a kind. I would argue, and I'm sure there's some people who on the internet who don't agree, I think he's one of the most important filmmakers of the 21st century, with my opinion. So
I think whether you like his films or not, that's true. That statement is true.
I think, I think it's kind of objectively true. And again, not, always being my cup of tea, it does have that cultural impact that you both are speaking to. And so I don't think you could really deny that, again, whether or not you're a fan of him or not, or not. It's just, he's made that mark.
Yeah. Well, listeners, what do you think of Christopher Nolan? Are you a big fan? What do you like about his sensibilities? Or maybe what do you hate about his sensibilities? You can let us know. If you're watching on YouTube, comment below the video. If you're chiming in on Instagram, leave a comment there. Or you can send us an email at thecinematropoulos@gmail.com. With all that said, let's get into our spoiler-free review of The Odyssey.
No one could stand between me and home. Not even the gods.
Keep us straight!
Gentlemen, it's been quite the journey to get there. We've been talking about this for well over a year. We made box office predictions. By the way, I just need to remind you, I have a lot at stake in this movie being successful. My credibility as a box office speculator is tied to this movie being the biggest domestic box office hit of the year. So I just gotta say, The Odyssey, gentlemen, we finally made it. Let's see if it performs. According to IMDb, The Odyssey is described as, after the Trojan War, Odysseus faces a dangerous voyage back to Ithaca, meeting creatures like the Cyclops, the Sirens, and Calypso along the way. A few notable facts about The Odyssey. This film carries a production budget of $250 million. On paper, it's the most expensive movie Christopher Nolan has ever made. However, he still maintains that The Dark Knight Rises is more expensive once you adjust for inflation. It's also rated R, making it one of the, if not the most expensive R-rated movie ever made. The film stars Matt Damon as Odysseus, Tom Holland as Telemachus, Anne Hathaway as Penelope, Robert Pattinson as Antinous, and you can basically say it's a who's who of A-list actors who fill out the rest of the cast. Everyone, down to the smallest part, are movie stars in other movies.
Yeah. Who's your favorite actor? He's in The Odyssey.
He's in there. Yeah, exactly. I mean, Mia Goth showing up for like 3 scenes, and she's great in the 3 scenes, but it's like, this is Christopher Nolan's 13th full-length feature film, and it is his first film since Oppenheimer won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Director, Actor, Supporting Actor, Cinematographer, Editing, and Score. And he actually reunites with most of these collaborators, including the editor, Jennifer Lane, the score, Ludwig Göransson, and cinematographer, Hoytman Hoytema. This is the first film shot completely on 70 millimeter IMAX. And I won't get into all the technical. There's tons of like documentaries and YouTube videos you can watch about this. Go listen to Christopher Nolan talk about it. Short version is the reason it's never been done before is these cameras are big and clunky, and they also make a ton of noise. So in his other films, when he shot certain sequences, even large portions of the movie in IMAX, they never did the full movie because of how much noise it generated, which made it harder for the actors to deliver the most emotional scenes, right? In this case, they created some sort of like soundproof box And it was like the Ark of the Covenant. It was like 8 dudes carrying around the set, the IMAX camera. So, again, behind the scenes, watch all that stuff online. There's a lot of fun stuff here. Another interesting thing, note about this. The log line and additional details of the premise of the Odyssey were kept secret compared to Nolan's previous films, which prompted a ton of speculation about the subject matter. I don't know if you guys remember. It was like, well, Christopher Nolan's work at the time is like, he's working on something. We don't know. Oh my gosh, he's got movie stars. We know they're in it, but we don't know what it is. The rumors included that this would be a period piece with vampires, something along the lines of Sinners, a reboot of the 1983 helicopter action thriller Blue Thunder, or an adaptation of the British spy television series The Prisoner. Great TV series, by the way. All of which are like, yep, that sounds like something Nolan might do. What's notable here, too, is he was previously attached to direct the film Troy, 2004. That was based on the Iliad. That was a film that Wolfgang Peterson ended up doing with Warner Brothers. Peterson actually was originally working on a Batman versus Superman film, but opted to do Troy, and then Christopher Nolan went and did Batman Begins afterwards. So we're coming full circle here. Lastly, this film took place in 6 countries over 91 days, including Morocco, Greece, Italy, Iceland, Scotland, and the United States. And I'm just saying this because they don't do this anymore. They really don't do this anymore. You might get 2 countries and half of it is on a soundstage in one of those countries. Like this does not happen anymore.
Yeah, especially with like James Bond movies, they've changed the whole scope of that for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, gentlemen, before we actually review the movie, I just want to ask. I kind of walked you through a few of the rumors going around. So, as I said, Christopher Nolan has the blankest of blankest checks. He's won the Oscars. He's somehow turned an R-rated biopic that's 3 hours long into almost $1 billion hit. Truly insane. I just have to say. What was your initial reaction when it was announced that he was making the Odyssey? And I'll throw it to you first, Laron.
I don't question him. At this point, as many movies as he's made, I know if he's making it, he has a reason not yet known to the public that will be revealed, from the work itself. And on paper, I was like, that makes sense. I don't know. It's interesting that would be the choice. I've seen the old one. I've obviously read the book when I was in high school, so I'm generally familiar with it. But it did seem strange, but I also thought Oppenheimer felt strange. I was like, why this? It was like, who cares? Like, okay, but at the same time, I also know he's gonna find something. There's normally a character or a theme or a concept or an idea that he's just really itching at the whole time. And we definitely see a lot of his themes synthesized here in this particular film throughout the course of his whole filmography in the Odyssey that you wouldn't think he would even be able to apply here, but he does, So I didn't question it, but I was very, very curious as to what he was going to glean from the Odyssey that hasn't already been labored over in literally high school level education, that we're learning about these things at a very early age in that part of our lives. So we are well aware of this, and if we're curious, there's a lot of text, a lot of think pieces, a lot of history, historians. So there's so much stuff that could be used. So to tell this story now feels like, is it redundant? But as we're going to discuss, I think he's found some ways to make it relevant to now.
Yeah, I absolutely. Dan, what's your take here?
Yeah, and I think I also get it that it does feel to some extent maybe a bit peculiar, but at the same time, I do think if you look at the Christopher Nolan's filmography, a classic adaptation feels like something that should be in there that really isn't. And now it is. And so I think in that way it makes sense. Now, does that mean it would have had to have been the Odyssey? I think at first glance, probably not. But at the same time, one of the things I think that he manages to do that is almost a little like ineffable to describe, but I guess he takes these mythological figures, or he takes figures and sort of mythologizes them. I think Batman is a pretty good example of that. But even if they're not known characters, like in Interstellar, or they are known characters, but maybe we don't think of them in this particular way, like Oppenheimer, he is able to approach those subjects and again ground them and make them relatable, but you don't lose that sense of awe. This is sort of a myth and a person, or a character, I should say, or a figure that's pushing against something that at times feels bigger than life itself. And I think we get that, especially in Interstellar. And again, I think more of his more recent films we've seen, and maybe with the exception of Tenet, does manage to raise the stakes and put them again in this what feels like a kind of mythological setting, while still feeling realistic. So and that's definitely what he does with this film too, is he does bring it down to earth without losing that sense of what it actually is, which is one of the most recognizable stories of all time. So while it's like he could have done anything, so why this? Like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. But at the same time, it makes almost perfect sense that he would approach a myth as big as the Odyssey. So yeah, it's bizarre, but definitely excited. And it's like, even when I heard it was announced, I'm like, I can't even think of another filmmaker
That could
really.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure, and there are filmmakers we don't know about who probably could and surprise us with what they managed to pull off, but to make it in this particular way that feels both faithful.
Yeah, but to get $250 million from a studio, you know what I mean?
Actually, be able to do whatever you want, and yes, to move around a 70 millimeter thing on like basically like a palanquin that has to be operated by so many different people. And then to still get emotional performances, and we'll get into that. And again, weirdly, the one thing that is also kind of memed is Christopher Nolan's sound design. Oh my God, the clarity of this film, and hearing people, I'm like,
it was actually the clearest his movie since in a while. Yeah,
I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be able to understand all the dialogue in this one.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's to say to your point. Yeah, I think one thing that you said that really stuck out to me is him. It is kind of a hole in his filmography. He hasn't done like a big fantasy epic or big historical epic yet. It's something that, in hindsight, it's very obvious, like he would want to do that. What's interesting about the Odyssey, though, fun fact, there's not a film adaptation of this that exists. There is a mini series of this.
Yep.
There have been like a lower 5 version, but there has not been a full big screen version of the Odyssey that's made, at least not in our lifetime, or probably our parents' lifetime at least. There are elements of the Odyssey that have incorporated all the right Harryhausen and stuff. You probably think, oh yeah, they've done the Odyssey before. Go look. There's not a movie of the Odyssey. There's O Brother, Where Art Thou? There was that one, The Return, that came out a couple of years ago that's taking place just at the end, but there is not a like start to finish adaptation of the Odyssey. And so for him to go back and for him to identify that and say, hey, what's one that hasn't been told? I also have this epic, like, I also want to leverage the success I have to basically take the biggest swing I can. I mean, doing 6 different countries with the tech he wants, with virtually every movie star, like, that's what I mean by no one could do it like this. Steven Spielberg probably couldn't do this at this point in time. Like,
I honestly don't know how successful this would have been with another name attached to it. Like, I say that, like, think of another filmmaker, maybe even a relatively well-known one, that would have took this on. It might have done fine, but I don't think it would have done these kind of numbers. And I think there's something about that. There's something about his films that just, there's a weight to them, and you just have to see, you have to experience them. You know, whether you walk away liking it or not, there's still something just so heavy and dense about all of his movies. Like, he doesn't make lighthearted comedies or you know what I mean, or traditional, but they always feel huge in scope, and you just want to know, what the hell is this thing, with everything that he makes, you know, so.
Yeah. You do want to see on the big, and he did a great job as part of his brand. And I mean, I think just with the stories he's telling and how he's executing them, really making it, Laron said, making it feel like an event. I must see this in a theater. I must see this on a premium screen. If I can help it, by golly, I must see it on a 70 millimeter IMAX screen if I can. You know, like, those tickets are sold out for weeks in New York and LA, weeks. And they're playing those shows 24 hours a day in a couple of these cities, FYI, and they're still sold out. So yeah, the amount of fervor that I'm saying, he's got that kind of fan base and he knows it, that it's going to bring out the crowds, that's going to make enough money to get the studio to get behind to write the $250 million check. So I also think the last thing that's interesting here is, and this is not a Chris Nolan thing, because I'm pretty sure he doesn't play Roblox or Fortnite, but the marketing team at Universal has really gotten extremely creative. As a marketer, I just looking at all the different levers they're pulling in terms of viral marketing, just putting the giant horse on beaches around the planet, making character skins in Fortnite, one of the most popular video games of all time. Like just all sorts of things that I'm like, man, that's that's cool. They actually pull that off. So they've done a great job at like expanding him, whereas we mentioned Spielberg or even Tarantino at this point, frankly. A lot of these directors are losing cred, and it's not even their fault. That's like cred. Like in terms of like, there's just so many things competing for everyone's attention today. There's so few filmmakers that demand you see their film on the big screen where people genuinely want to do it. That in order to stay relevant, they're having to adopt all these new techniques in order to market the film. And I didn't see that for Disclosure Day, for example. So anyway, I just say like, Chris Nolan, the people he's got working for him and pushing it are doing a really great job at making him stay relevant. It's not like a one and done or a decade done. It's like, nah, dude, this guy's releasing it. It's a big event. And by the way, we're going to make sure you're talking about it, whether you go see it or not. So yeah, he's the only guy that could make the Odyssey, especially in this way. Is it any good though? We've been hyping it. Laron's already tipped his hand a little bit. Laron, just take it away here. Is it okay? Just all right?
It's all right. No, I feel like, yeah, no, I mean, obviously my expectations were through the roof. I wouldn't say Christopher Nolan is like my top 10 filmmaker necessarily, but I think that I'm someone who would consider myself a fan of his work, pretty much most of his films. But that being said, every time I'm excited to go to the theater to see a Chris Nolan movie because it reminds me of how exciting it was watching the first major Christopher Nolan movie. You know what I mean? And he's able to conjure that excitement and that anticipation around his work consistently through with every project, no matter the subject, no matter the genre. And so this on paper, if you told me they were going to make the Odyssey movie, I would be like, I'm not particularly interested in seeing that particular story adapted, but if you tell me he's making it, absolutely. And so I came into this with a lot of anticipation as to why this was why I need this right now. And I think the sheer enormity of this movie at times is super overwhelming at times, and just looking at the scope of this project and the craftsmanship, how many hours were put into building these sets and the practical sets, the practical use, everything felt textured and felt like we were witnessing these huge things in real time. And that's a difficult thing to remove, and with most movies, you have to bring in a certain sense of suspension of belief, to sit there and watch a giant, Cyclops walk around but giving it skin, giving it texture, putting it in the shadows, he just turned this into something that feels to me like, and maybe this is hyperbole for some, but this feels like our generation's Ben-Hur or Lawrence of Arabia. I feel like this is a film we're going to be talking about, for many years to come. I think the set pieces are breathtaking. The cast across the board, I think, is doing really tremendous work, even in the tiniest roles. And but he's able to have this idea of peace and serenity and poetry kind of colliding, with this rumination about the internal and external conflicts and consequences of war. And I think that doing that in this context right now is very timely as we are actively in a war, as we have actively been traumatized by past wars, as we're actually having conversations about the sins of those wars and how we as a humanity moving forward, how we ingest that material, what lessons we learn from that, if any, and how that colors what we do moving forward. And I think that this film is really important right now. And I also think that it's making a statement in a way that a lot of films that normally cover this subject don't cover to this depth, And so I think it's a really huge triumph for him. And I'm having a hard time knowing where I place it in his filmography, but hot off of it from last night, I'm still kind of buzzing that it exists. Seems like a bit of a miracle, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. I think that's great. Dan Bokemper, what did you think of the Odyssey?
Yeah, overwhelming is a good way to describe it initially, and not entirely in a bad way, but there are so many individual set pieces in this film that could sustain a film by itself, which might be why we think there's been a version of this adapted to film already, but it's actually just a million different other things that are talking about the Odyssey or tangentially about the Odyssey, or even take a story out of it, or have to be broken up into like a, like an episodic miniseries. And that's, I cannot imagine the nightmare that it was to probably edit this film, because it feels like this could have been like a 10-hour movie. Not that I would have wanted to see that or enjoy that, but again, there is that sense of weight, and it is so well cast. Like, it's like one of the first like ensembles I've seen that, when you just see the list of names, some of them, like Travis Scott or something might feel somewhat kind of random, but they all are done so well and just make a lot of sense. Mia Goth, calling her out, that's so good, because I forget how little she is in of the film, but they all fill those roles so well. Samantha Morton as Cersei. What an excellent sequence. And again, there's so many like things about this movie that could sustain a feature-length narrative in of itself. You could totally have a body horror movie about Cersei and it have weight and gravity and feel, and actually, be well executed. But there's so many different things going about it. Again, it's the sound design, I think, for me, stuck out. That first Cyclops scream you hear, it's just like, I don't think I've ever heard anything quite like that, in a film. And I don't mean to hyperbolize it. It sounds a bit like a hyperbole, but
it's not. I agree.
No.
I don't think I've heard something like that before. Yeah.
Right. And it's, and Laron, what you were saying earlier, what makes Nolan is the ability to eventize movies. I think he also sort of almost to some extent reinvents them a little bit every time. Again, not saying this is also like my favorite movie. It's not even my favorite Nolan film, but it does so many things right that it feels like the quintessential Nolan movie. It feels like this is definitely the film he's been waiting to make, and being able to actually get it done is huge. But again, yes, love the casting, some, specific things, including like I questioned a little bit. I'm like, Matt Damon as Odysseus, and then just seeing it, it's like so well done, because he can play both roles of Odysseus.
Off his shirt and you're like, okay, no, I'm kidding.
No questions asked. Okay, yes, sir. And
I have I can't do a British. I can't do the Christopher Nolan voice. So Matt, I need you to go Jason Bourne. And you have a role. Yeah. I'm going to go Jason Bourne. Like, because he does go Jason Bourne.
But
it's that cost, that real human cost of conflict and war. He captures that. Of course, there is a sequence that has to happen essentially in any kind of Odyssey film that's going to be, an adaptation that is sort of the culmination that again feels very earned and feels very good in the purpose of the story. But it does for a man who's learning that violence is probably not great, and the results of it are horrific, to have to then do a really big violent act. It hits odd, and it's not Nolan's fault. Like, I'm not like saying like, I think Nolan still gets his message across, and I'm not saying it like sabotages that, but it does feel conflicting and it feels challenging. I'm going to say in a really good way. And it's kind of like with Oppenheimer. There's certain elements of Oppenheimer that people were like, well, he chose not to show the real brutality of Nagasaki and Hiroshima and what this weapon did. But I still don't think that's the fact that he didn't do that sabotaged the meaning or the intent.
Yeah.
And it's kind of similar here. I don't think the Suitor massacre.
So your criticism is you were a little underwhelmed by the Suitor, or conflicted about how to feel about these.
I'm not under, because oddly at the same time I'm like, I kind of wish there was a little more of it, because it is done so well, and it's building and it's building and it's building, and it's still like a satisfying end. It's coming if you know anything about the Odyssey, but it's still the message that the film ultimately leaves on. It's the text supports, but it does it in a way that's, I think, appropriately
there's some nuance.
Like,
I think there's some nuance there.
It's nuanced, but it's just challenge. Like, I don't. It's just kind of hard to reconcile.
It's kind of. I understand. There's a little bit of a juxtaposition, and like what's being said in one scene and what's being done in the very next.
It's like, what was he going to do? And I still think it's delivered. And I
So,
still
but
think
like just to sum it up though, but you think like
Yeah.
you're not sure how to feel about the ending though. Is kind of what I early promotes the ending. So
Yeah, it's not like 100% like it's not and none of his movies are like perfect bows is the thing. So I think it's actually a good thing and it feels,
Yeah.
on brand for Nolan. But yeah, otherwise it is just this huge, huge spectacle that you really should see in as grand a stage as you can.
And I like
Yeah.
I like the duality of that. You know,
Yeah.
the of him making the decision, like feeling the weight of it, but then also maybe doing things that seem to go against what he's saying. Because I think it shows just how frail, how our humanity is, and like
Exactly.
that,
Yeah.
right.
and how we're capable of holding multitudes and
Right.
feeling the weight of our decisions, but still feeling, still making some of those
Yeah.
traps, which
I
also
Yeah.
speaks to why this story keeps being told, which we'll talk about more
Yeah,
later.
well, and I do want to reiterate. Dan, I know what you're talking about. I think there's some nuances where it's parsing. We'll save it for spoilers though. But yeah, listen, guys. I think this thing. Yeah, Laron, you already said. I think this thing's a triumph. I honestly, this movie does a lot of the, let's say, obvious things well. We already went through it. You shoot all this on set. Everything looks very real and very lived in. The actors are uniformly across the board A+. Robert Pattinson is so despicable. Matt Damon is so likable, yet also and relatable, and yet you get frustrated by Odysseus frequently. I mean, gosh, even Tom Holland, who I have a lot of doubts about frequently, I was like, he's pretty good. He's a useless character. Like the character is useless, and that's the point of the character. And he does a really good job at being like this, like young, naive, kind of helpless, but also hungry, prince. And gosh, Anne Hathaway is just the best she's ever been. She takes, like a few good scenes and makes them like showstopper scenes. Yeah. It's so yeah, the performances are great. Those are the and then of course Christopher Nolan does a thing where he's somehow able to provide a twist plot twist is not the correct term because it's not a plot twist, but the way in which he is able to reframe how we think about the story that we have just watched at the end of the movie really turns the meaning of the movie on its head completely, which is a thing Christopher Nolan has done so well in so many different other films. For him to do it with something that we do know, like the Odyssey, we are taught about in high school, is just super, super impressive. And not only does he do that, the way he reframes it is what makes it feel very contemporary of the moment. A movie we actually need in our culture right now. I mean, frankly, we've probably needed it we've needed, but like it feels.
Where
like
were you 10 years ago, Chris Nolan?
Right, yeah.
We needed these
But yes, exactly. But it feels like an important, timely movie that I also think is not going to feel so timely that in 10 years we're gonna be like, oh man, can you believe that hasn't aged well? No, it is both timely. Oh my gosh, this is a thing we need to hear
and
as a culture right now.
Faithful to the text.
Faithful. And it'll be timeless. It'll be timeless too, though, because the message is I don't think it's going to change over time how important the thing he's sort of getting at is. And yes, it is also very sticks to the text. It's not like reinventing the wheel or anything. I would just say, though, I think the last thing I would say that was sort of a surprise, or I guess two different things. The movie, he dabbles in horror more than he has in previous films, and it's incredibly effective. Like, it's not a horror movie, but there are 2 or 3 of these like vignettes or episodes or whatever that are, oh my God, this feels like some of the best horror I've seen in a while in that particular sequence, which shows that he's sort of pushing himself. And the other thing I would say is, one major criticism Christopher Nolan has often received, and I agree with it sometimes, not all the time, is that he lacks an emotional core to his movies. They're almost too intellectual. And I think there are some films that is true. I think there are some films that is not true. What I will say definitively, though, is the Odyssey, the last 30 minutes of the Odyssey really hit me on a deeply emotional level that I did not know a Nolan film was capable of for me. Even though I like his movies, it's not what I go to his movies for. And and I think that's why this is just going to be it's a classic that I think is going to stick around. It's got all the stuff. I guess if I was going to nitpick anything, the movie is almost 3 hours long, and yet it still feels like there's so much on the chopping room floor. Given the source material, the second act does feel episodic. I also don't know how you get around that and make a movie called The Odyssey. And I also think that part of the point is his men on the ship are also tired and exhausted and ready to move on. So in a certain light, it feels like you are right there with them. So I think that's probably a pro than a con, but I can say there are going to be certain people who are like, can we just get on with it? That would probably be if I was really going to like nitpick. I don't even think it's necessarily valid. It's just a thing I would call out is the pacing in Act 2 does kind of slow down and take me off. But otherwise, I think this movie is amazing. I don't think it feels like 3 hours long, honestly. I think the whole thing was so immersive. It worked. Real quick question for you guys. What format did you see the Odyssey in? Dan?
I didn't see it in IMAX, but I saw it in 70 millimeter. So
Very nice.
Yeah, I don't know. So a more intimate crowd, which is kind of cool, but still, still getting the scope, still getting the full frame.
And the reel didn't break? The reel didn't break on you?
It did not. No.
Yes.
It took a little bit of time to switch over and set up to a point where it got a little awkward, but I'm also like, these are massive film reels. It's going to take time, but I think everyone was sort of holding their breath for a brief second. People started to turn to look, not only because you can feel it when they switch over to that 70 millimeter, and it's a pretty fun experience, but at the same time, you're like, oh, I hope this works. It feels like a science experiment that could go wrong every time it's happening, but no, 70 millimeter, not IMAX. Probably going to try and at least make an IMAX screening before it's out.
Yeah, awesome, very good. Laron, how did you see it?
I saw it in IMAX, but not in 70 millimeters. So there's that. So we reversed that,
Yes.
Daniel, and I saw it at the big IMAX theater in Oklahoma City. I mean, not Oklahoma City, Moore, Oklahoma, and to a packed house. And man, I mean, that screen. I mean, it felt like the proper way to see how the entire frame, to see everything that's happening. So yes, definitely one of those theater going experiences I'm going to remember for a very long time.
Yeah. I do think the Moore Warren is the best IMAX in the state of Oklahoma. I would say so, at least in my experience. So I think that's a great screen. I probably would have done what you did, Dan, and saw 70 millimeter. I did see it in 70 millimeter, so I've seen it twice. I was very fortunate to see it at an advanced screener here in Seattle, and then I went and it played in 70 millimeter at an AMC, and then the second time I saw it in 70 millimeter at SIF Seattle International Film Festival. They own a few theaters here in the city, and it was called SIF Downtown, and they were playing it in 70 millimeter. Now, one thing I want to note, the first time, the press screener, everything worked. We were all kind of joking about it. We're like, oh, guys, there's this film. There's a higher than 25% chance this thing's going to break midway through the movie. Went off seamlessly. Unfortunately, mostly for my wife, who did not attend the press screening with me, the first one, the film reel did break at the SIF Downtown, unfortunately. Huge hats off to the entire staff. The staff was amazing. They were ready. It broke twice. It was the first time it broke about 30 or so minutes into the film. They said, hey, we're going to fix it. It was great. Everyone took a quick potty break. And then they got it back up, and about 30 minutes later, it broke again. And they're like, hey, guys, super sorry. We're going to switch to DCP. I know this is not the thing, outcome we wanted, but we appreciate your flexibility. They gave us vouchers, refunded tickets. Anyway, huge kudos to them because they were ready. Like, I was really worried they were going to be like, all right, guys, sorry, it's broken. We got to go home. Yeah. I only mention this because the reason I found it interesting was it gave me a real opportunity to do an apples to apples comparison between the digital DCP on the same screen and the 70 millimeter, which I've never done a direct comparison that way. And I have to say the 70 millimeter, again, not 70 millimeter IMAX. I have to go to Canada for that one. The 70 millimeter does look a lot better. It's a weird thing where it's simultaneously grainier, but the colors pop a lot more. The natural lighting, stuff like when they're in the caves with the Cyclops, for example, the natural lighting feels a lot more textured. When they're on the sea and the ocean was bluer and it looks bigger. I don't know how to describe it. It is a noticeable difference.
And the lighting especially, because there's moments of the Cyclops where it's like it needs to be as dark as it is, even though I do kind of hate the overuse of darkness in certain movies sometimes. In this film, it's definitely deliberate, but I do question if I worry on a digital format if it would kind of make this a little just slightly harder to interpret. So yeah, there is that vibrance that I feel like is kind of needed.
Yeah, it's the lighting. I think the lighting and the color is a big thing, and it was just interesting when we switched. I could tell. Now, it was not that the digital looked bad; it just everything looks like slightly smoothed over, and that in some ways you lose the graininess, which some people would call a negative. But you also the colors just don't pop. The lighting does not hit the same way. So, if you can see it in 70 millimeter, highly recommend that. And maybe you do 170 millimeter, one IMAX if you can't get to a 70 mil IMAX theater, which there's only like 25 of them in the whole country. So, I'm just curious, like, you know, this being the only film to be filmed in 70 millimeter IMAX in its entirety, there is this kind of weird problem that Christopher Nolan's created where he's like, well, the best way to see this is at one of these like 25 theaters in the country or less than 50 in the whole world.
Right.
So there's going to be people out there. I just worry. They're like, well, if I can't see it that way, then I just don't know if I want to see it. I don't know. What do you guys make about this whole conversation around the formats?
I feel like it's very silly to not see it just because you can't see it in the best format possible. You know what I mean? Because like,
oh, I agree. Yeah.
At the same time, there's no like filmmaking or storytelling or script element. Or ultimately, I even think in terms of the cinematography, that's still clear how well done it is. Like even if it is in a digital format, I don't think there are things you lose not seeing it in that, but it's still it's just one of those things. I mean, and unfortunately, we live in an age where things aren't super accessible all the time, especially some of those ultimately premium formats. Because I don't think, Laron, is there anywhere in Oklahoma that's showing it in both 70 millimeter and IMAX? You like have to,
No,
it's one or the other,
Dallas
really.
Is the closest.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just hard. But like so here's the thing. If there is somebody who, and this is a pretty hypothetical person, but if there's someone who's like that diehard of I have to see it in this format to see it, they're gonna go see it. Like they'll drive.
Yeah, they'll find a way.
The 5 to 6 hours, possibly even hop on a plane. If it's that difficult to go see it. And
I talked to someone at the press screening. I thought at the press screening I was at, one of the people was like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna go fly to LA to see it in 70 millimeter IMAX."
Yeah.
The only reason I didn't see it in Dallas is because they were sold out for 3 weeks, and I'm not waiting that long to watch it. So but I think what he's doing really well here with this conversation is, he's creating a logistical issue, but I think what he's doing, the hard work of what a lot of filmmakers are kind of like, with the advent of AI technology, with the advent of different ways and methodologies to kind of automate things and make things more, he is preserving traditional formats of filmmaking, and he down to the way he's making his movies and the way his sets are created, constructed, like practical effects. Yes, it's going to be hard. Yes, it's going to be difficult, but we're going to make something incredible that's textured and will look the same forever. You know what I mean? Like, so it's not going to feel dated many, many years later because we are using real things you can reach out and touch. And the best way to experience those things is to see it in the formats that they would have traditionally been projected in. And so I feel like, in a way, yes, it's a variety. You can see it in any format you want. Some people don't care about any of this; they'll see it wherever. And I think really this is only a conversation for cinephiles and film goers, like passionate purists.
Like the diehardest of cinephiles too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I just think it's great that he's provided the option, for this to be something, because you're also giving people somewhat of an education of the way that this was done a long time ago, and giving them the space to learn that, and it might just inspire some young filmmaker, and to go and look at that sort of thing. And so I think he's doing something that's really difficult, and only someone of his caliber could really move the needle and even push people to go to the theater to go see a 70 millimeter movie in a state that they're not in, because they know that he's made good use of that. So
yeah. I think the two other things I'd add on to that. Number one is, not only is he doing the work to add to that preserves film, it creates this conversation around this thing. There's like videos going around where they have all the video formats, and I was sending it to people, and they're like, "Oh my God, I had no idea this was a thing." And most of them don't care, but some of them are like, "Oh, that's interesting," and it creates an appreciation for film history. that I just think would be lost if there wasn't someone of his caliber driving this conversation. Even if people can't drive however far they need to go or fly however far they need to go to see it in 7mm IMAX, they're still talking about the fact that that's even an option.
Yeah.
And why is that an option then is interesting? And it speaks to how films have historically been made. It is not only a way to preserve the way films have been made, it is a way to preserve the memory of how they've been made in the culture, And I just think it really also says a lot about Christopher Nolan. He has been a guy who sticks to his guns for better or for worse. I would say usually for the better, but he's been passionate about IMAX his entire career, at least since The Dark Knight. And he hasn't backed down, and now he's able to shoot a full film, in a full 3-hour-long movie with IMAX cameras. By the way, a thing we didn't mention before, those reels are extremely heavy, and you can only use every shot can only be up to 3 minutes long. So imagine they're having to stitch together this movie because the reels run out after 3 minutes, and it's this huge film. So what they're doing is incredibly difficult, which leads me to my second point, that on a technical level, what he's doing, okay, there's the cultural impact. There's also the technical impact of, and he's been talking about this a lot too. He's like, well, we hope you can see it in one of these theaters, but if you can't, here's what you do need to know. The source for this movie is of the highest caliber you can possibly film a movie. So even the lesser versions are going to be better because the source file is so strong. And I think that's also a really great way to look at it too. So anyway, I talk about this 70mm thing because it's almost kind of like a meme on the internet. But having seen, I think the last one of his movies I saw 70mm would have been Interstellar. And I do have tickets to see this one in Canada in a couple days. But it is a really unique thing that you get a frame as full as it is at that resolution. So if you can make it to one of those, even if it's like a month from now, make it happen. Make a weekend of it if you're traveling. Like,
and you're seeing this emphasis on form, across like a lot of our tours. I mean, just last year with Sinners, Ryan Coogler was giving people like a very, like here are all the different ways you can experience this movie. And the same thing. I think before that we had Oppenheimer. We also had Tarantino's The Hateful Eight. I think
The Hateful Eight is the only reason half the projectors. Dan, you watched this movie on 70mm. The only reason Quail Springs in Oklahoma City has that 70mm projector is because Tarantino negotiated a deal with Weinstein Company whenever Hateful Eight came out. He's like, if you want this movie, you've got to get these projectors in all these theaters all over the country, which is just insane. Sorry, Laron, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's a great point. No, I'm just saying that there's obviously a hunger from people of filmmakers of that stature that are trying to preserve this kind of tradition of seeing films in that format, because so much has changed in the digital age, and things are flatter now, and lighting looks cheaper now in certain movies and things like that. And there's like certain movies that were made in the 90s, and then you see the 2000 version of the sequel of that movie, and you're just like, there's a stark difference in the way that those movies were made and told, and the way that they're being projected now is like a standard. And it's something that this homogenization of that makes things all look the same because it's easier. And again, automation, making things simple. We're going to do things one way, streamline it. I understand that from a practicality, production value standpoint, but real artisans like him who actually care about the craftsmanship of filmmaking, about cinema, beyond that, are showing how much of a difference it makes to work that much harder to get something that's going to preserve and stand the test of time. So I appreciate that. About him and other filmmakers who have been advocating for that.
Yeah, that is going to be carved on his gravestone. That'll be projected in 70mm IMAX. Here lies Christopher Nolan. 70mm IMAX is the way to watch movies. We're going to get to letter grades in a second, and then of course we'll rank our top 10 Christopher Nolan films. But I guess maybe like last question: how would we compare? Someone hasn't seen the Odyssey yet. There are people out there who haven't seen the Odyssey yet. How would you compare this to Nolan's previous films? I'll throw to you first, Dan.
Yeah, it does feel, like I mentioned earlier, that it feels like this sort of like pinnacle of a lot of things he's done in previous films. I feel like it is. It just makes a lot of sense, like to finally have him really approach a myth, because again, he's been mythologizing characters throughout his entire, career. And so to actually tackle a really well-known myth, I think makes a lot of sense. And it still maintains those elements. It still has a strong, conflicted central figure that you're going to see in Oppenheimer, that you see in almost every movie, even Tenet, and of course the Batman trilogy, Interstellar, as well. It has those elements to it, but it's also its own thing. It sort of steps into a realm that he doesn't, I haven't seen him step into, and it just feels, I don't know, but it feels so right. It like feels like those films, despite it being, an ancient Greek epic. It's still kind of, you get that, like that those goosebumps that you get from the best moments of The Dark Knight, or maybe Inception or something like that, and that larger in life scale. So like, yeah, it's different in a really good way, because I think everything he's going to do is going to be a bit different for the most part. To what extent maybe varies between certain films, but at the end of the day, he is trying to take that leap and kind of take that stand for originality, when, Laron, what you were saying earlier, when, especially from a storytelling perspective, like homogenization feels easier. It feels easier to do things, which is funny because, again, this is an adaptation of a very like foundational piece of literature that we've, that we've made countless stories out of in some way or another, has been shaped and molded by it. So then to actually like stare that piece directly in the face and provide his own take on it. It despite how shitty things are sometimes, it's like you can't help but feel a little lucky that we exist in the timeline where Nolan was able to
make
this movie.
It's crazy too. Like I think it's what's so awesome is, again, we'll talk about in spoilers. He puts his own spin on it. We keep saying that, right, and it's true. But also, it's close enough to the text that I could so see a high school history teacher playing at least parts of this in the classroom to like educate, because it does stick. It does hit the same beats, and it does so in a super engaging way, and that's how it also feels iconic, in a certain light. Laron, what do you think? How would you compare Nolan, the Odyssey, to Nolan's previous films?
Yeah, he has like like, as to Dan's point, like he loves a complicated, layered male figure,
right,
that is distressed and haunted by choices that they've made or choices they have to make, and that seems to be a through line through most of his stories. And I think so in that way, I think it's comparative, to them. And I think that, but he's interrogating the text, in an interesting way that I don't think we have yet. And so that's what makes this exciting and feel new again. Like we're experiencing the Odyssey sometime, in some ways for the first time, because he's asking questions we weren't asking then, and I think that that's the difference here in interpretation. It is an adaptation. There are people who have a lot of issues with some of the adaptive choices that he's made here, from the anachronistic casting to all of these different things. But I think it's because he's trying to get us to look at the root of the story, like
right,
like what is the essence of what the story is about. You're fixated on some figures that aren't even real. They're and yet that's not the point of this story. You know what I mean? Like that.
Well, it was never the point of the story. These are mythological characters. They're not. You can't assign. It is. Well, we'll talk about spoilers. It is no accident that Matt Damon is an American. He cast Odysseus as an American versus a British actor, which you would probably see like tons. Even Troy. Like they these types of historical dramas tend to gravitate towards those cats Brits. No, he cast an American, which sort of leads itself to, well, why did he do that? And when he does that, that also informs his other casting choices. And then you start to think, this is making a lot of sense.
Yeah, everything feels intentional, and like you don't, in a way, it makes it more exciting because it's not so homogenized. Like these look like real people. These look like, you know what I mean? Like this multicultural, kind of view of the world, but then it makes us focus on the story at hand and not focusing on these individual figures or like, talking about why their hair is this texture, why is this what it doesn't. None of that is really, important to the story that we're telling here.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what he's trying to pull out of it is like, what has this story been teaching us all these years, and what lessons have we learned and not learned from it? And And he's asking those questions, which makes something as ancient as the Odyssey feel relevant again,
Right.
And that's interesting.
Yeah, if any adaptation, the very last thing you should be thinking about is, well, does the armor look like it's supposed to?
Yeah.
Or do all the people? Why would you even want that?
Well,
Like,
this
and
is
I'm
not
not
a period piece. That's
exactly.
The thing. This is not. I was having
even if it was, even and let's think about like the big period piece boy right now, like Robert Eggers, like it in his attention to detail, he's still taking liberties that are not going to be historically accurate.
Yeah.
And that's the point. And
Yeah.
I think people get so hung up, or maybe are afraid to set some of those things aside to allow yourself to be vulnerable to the story that's actually being told and to kind of let it in. And I think we kind of use these things to
other
to build up
excuses
walls
not to let in his
excuses.
messaging.
Yeah,
Here's
exactly.
my reason for why I reject this story. And instead of saying what is he saying with it, like instead you're like, here's my disqualifiers immediately.
Yeah. Well, and here's another thing. I think you guys have already hit on a lot of the key points there. He's synergizing a lot of things he's done very effectively and very well. This sort of exploring the curse of the great man, the curse of the great man, right? For one, he is playing with time. Even though this is the Odyssey, he does some really interesting stuff that I had to, the second time I was like, wait, the narrative structure for this is all over the place. Like when you first watch it, you're like, whoa, we're jumping around from POVs now, we're in flashback. What's going on? The second time it all clicked for me big time, but that's the thing we've seen him do time and time again. I mean, Memento being like the first time he did that, but we see it in The Prestige. We see it in Batman Begins. We've seen it, and you name it, Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
He loves to play with narrative structures, and he does so very effectively here. And again, he is a director who I think is so good at demonstrating why the form matters. You could have just told this as straight up linear, but it would not have landed the same way. Like the impact, the story he really wanted, the ideas he wanted to explore would not have had the same impact had this been purely linear.
Yep.
And so it's evidence that his approach to non-linear storytelling, he does it really well, and it actually really matters in some stories, right? So I think that's another thing in terms of like what he has in common. Go ahead, Dan.
Oh, no, I'm just going to say, and here's the thing. It's pretty necessary because, especially not telling it in a linear way, because, Homer wasn't necessarily, thinking about a lot of the thing. I don't know if our understanding of human psychology, it wasn't, not to take away from Homer. Sorry, Homer. I know. You're only...
Damn you, Homer!
Yeah, but it's like that storytelling simply, wasn't there to tell this in the way that it is, and to also kind of make us feel the things we do. Because again, Homer isn't the original Odyssey isn't a lament against the idea of war and conflict and why humans do violent things. I mean, well, actually, arguably, because of the way Nolan has looked at it and the way it's forcing us to look at it, we may think about it that way. And I think that's a really
that's the whole
great
point
thing
that
an adaptation can do, is make you think about this source material in a fundamentally different way. And he does, but it's impossible to do that if you tell it. Or it's nearly, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but very difficult to do that if you do not have the Troy and the Trojan horse as a constant within the film.
And let's remember too, like the Odyssey, Homer wrote it down, but this is a story that was passed down orally for hundreds of years before it actually gets on paper, right? And there's probably have been dozens of riffs on it in oral tradition.
For
sure.
Yeah,
it's kind of like the Bible. Anyway, different podcast right there. But I will say the last thing I want to hit on here is a thing we didn't mention yet is not only is he talking about war and the cost of war and all the good stuff we'll talk about in spoilers, he's also sort of restating why is it important that we keep telling ourselves these stories? Why is it important that I told you this version of this story right now so that the next generation can tell it again? There is a certain reverence for Homer, for the importance of the Odyssey, the story it's had on its impact, and the fact that it's never been on the big screen, and no one's I'm going to be the guy who puts it on the big screen so that he can put it out there, and the next generation can make the TikTok version or whatever the hell they're making in 100 years. You know what I mean? He is trying to immortalize something so that we do not lose something to the sands of time, as seems to be happening a lot lately. So those are things he hits on. We'll talk more in spoilers. A big difference here, though, is we've seen Nolan dabble in sci-fi quite a lot. Inception, arguably The Prestige, definitely Tenet. We've never really seen him do anything fantasy, as far as I can recall. And my God, does he go hard? We get, yes, the Cyclops. That Cyclops done practically, by the way, that is a combination of a giant ass puppet they put in a cave and an actor Bill Irwin in a costume. That is not, I know there are probably elements in CG, but he did go to every length to capture as much in the frame as possible before they even considered using CGI. So seeing his approach to some of these mythical moments is truly impressive, and also different than I've seen before. Again, the Cyclops cry you mentioned earlier, Dan. Like, I didn't think of, if you asked me what a Cyclops sound like, I would say I don't know, but I wouldn't have said that.
The most haunting thing I've heard in a very long time. Like,
there's a sequence where they visit with the dead midway through the movie, and it is truthfully very spooky and haunting, and the way exactly the way they float around and like all that stuff just feels so like no one's never done anything like that, and he just totally nails it and makes it feel larger than life, and it's so the images are so stark. It's going to live in your brain, right? Like just so he nailed it, going to a different genre
right now to make a straightforward horror movie. Now, like we need your horror, your interpretation of a classic horror movie or maybe even a modern one, but because he's got the sauce to be able to accomplish it. You just never. We got nice little shades in this one of other things he's capable of doing effectively. So
this film really reveals how much like he potentially still has in the tank. Like that's the thing. It's weird that Nolan has been such a fixture for so long, but it's like I want to see I'm not just because I'm wearing a Godzilla shirt, but I want to see the kaiju Nolan movie. Like that feels like really cool. But like there's so many other things too. Like especially again, I mentioned it earlier, but the Cersei sequence is like a film in of itself, and it's done so well. So
well, and I think you mentioned I guess that's the last point I would say just on the spoiler-free review is he's 13 movies in. Now he's still pretty young; he's in his 50s. This guy's still got bangers left in him. It's not like we haven't seen a Chris Nolan movie yet where I watched it and I said, "Oh, we've seen him do this before." Even Spielberg, a director I love, and I even like some of his lesser movies I love. There's times where like, okay, we've seen him touch on this before. We've seen him like do something kind of similar. And while thematically there are clear ideas that Nolan is interested in as a writer-director, every time he rolls it out, it's in a new context and way that makes me think about that idea differently. And I'm just like, man, we haven't seen Chris Nolan. He's still bringing the heat at 13 movies in. And he's still got great hits in the tank. He has still probably got more masterpieces or future big ideas coming. So just super impressive for a guy 13 movies in to where you're like, yep, he's still firing on all cylinders. It's good stuff. Well, guys, what letter grade would we give the Odyssey? And if you don't say something positive, I'm going to question what this whole conversation has been about. Yeah, exactly. Daniel Bokemper, what letter grade would you give the Odyssey?
Man, I teeter. I think I'm going to confidently say A- for right now, just because.
Is that your final answer, Dan?
Not forever, probably, but probably right. I don't know. I think so.
Daniel, you just lost Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Final answer.
Yes.
Yeah. In the context of this podcast, Dan Bokemper, final answer, A-. Laron Chapman, The Odyssey. What's your letter grade? Final answer.
Final answer. Well, you'll be surprised. It's also an A-. I think this is, I think it's a really, really, really solid piece of work, and I think it will appreciate over time. And I think that this grade could change, on repeated viewings. And I think that there's a lot more to kind of unpack with it, and see how it actually impacts, and as most of his films do 10 years later on revisit, you see the influence of each movie, whether it's the Dark Knight, whether it's Inception. Like, so this is no exception to that, and so I think there are things in this that are moments in cinematic history that we are going to refer to often. Again, no matter where you stand with it, just in terms of the scope and the sheer technical prowess of what was accomplished here, and to have it not be empty, because we've seen that before where you get the spectacle, but the storytelling's empty, And I think that he's pulled off a magic trick in really delivering on what he promised to us with this project. But I do think that there are certain things in it. You mentioned the pacing in the second half. Um, Nolan has this tendency with lady characters that I think he mostly corrects here, mostly, but
Mhm.
we'll talk maybe a little bit more lightly about that in spoilers. But I think for the most part, there are strong female characters in here. I do think there are some that could
Yeah.
be stronger, that could be stronger.
Mhm.
We've said that he has a woman problem, but I do think that there are
No
certain
dead wives. No dead wives this time, though.
no
Thankfully.
dead wives this time.
Yeah.
Exactly. I do think the women in here are interesting, at least. Like we'll give them that. And I think Anne Hathaway gets the brunt of everything, and she makes a meal out of it, as we kind of said. But I do think there are certain characters that I would have liked to have seen more of. Lupita Nyong'o in particular, on a craftsmanship level, on a like he created some indelible images here. I
Right.
still am reeling from again the sheer enormity of this movie. And again, I think it will appreciate over time. But I still think, yeah, like it's easily one of the best movies of the year. It'll be a
Mhm.
huge Oscar player again. A couple years later, he may even be in contention for winning in several categories. But I think that it's a great conversation piece for a lot of different reasons, both the text itself, how he's using it, and then also how he created it and what that says about the industry and how movies get made, all of that. So a very important film at this particular moment in our film industry, which is having an upending of many sorts and many different avenues. So A minus for now, but a really terrific, film, from Nolan.
Yep. I think that's all well said. Fair complaints. I'm gonna give it an A straight up. Like I hesitate to give it A plus. I don't think I've ever given an A plus on the show, but I mean, the first time I watched it, I was floored emotionally at the end. And then the second time I was like, okay, is this going to track better for me on round two? Is this actually going to land? And I am happy to report, for me at least, it appreciates considerably on round two. So that's why I feel going from the A minus to the A. The movie, my little reaction scheme, I said, this is cinema. But I mean, in terms of the Caleb Masters review, this movie has all the things I'm looking for. It is working on the biggest scale possible, doing everything practically. That's cool. But more importantly, it is taking a thing we already know, telling a familiar story, recontextualizing the story to really make us interrogate ourselves, our culture, our film industry. Ask these meaningful, thoughtful questions that create conversation, which is a thing I'm very passionate about. That's why this podcast exists, to talk about movies, what they mean, how they're shaping culture and influencing culture. And this is a movie that has cultural impact that will endure. And not only is it doing that, it has all the fun stuff, all the cool spectacle. It has all the movie stars delivering home run after home run after home run scenes. Could the women be more prominent? Yes, yes. But also, this is not Christopher Nolan's strong suit. And also, this is a movie that is based on a text that was also very male-driven. So it's one of those things I just kind of have to consider it. And I am like, well, he probably gave Penelope more to do than she actually got in the original text. So, there's that to consider. But overall, I think this is a movie I can't wait to revisit again for a third time. I can't wait to share with other people. I can't wait to talk to other people about it. And I think it's a cultural moment. Laron, to your point, in a moment that the film industry desperately needs a champion to kind of come through with a big home run on a white horse to say, this is why we make movies the way we do. For all that said, I think this is an A. Really quickly, what alternate media recommendations do you have for the Odyssey? And I'll throw it to you first, Laron.
For sure, Oppenheimer. I think these are two really great companion pieces. I know it's the movie he just immediately made, but I really think there's an interesting conversation these movies are having with each other. Again, about the confliction that we have, particularly as it pertains to war and the collateral damage of war, and how we can say certain things are victories when so much is wreaked in the havoc of those decisions, and what it means to again create, to mythologize these characters as heroes and have these different perceptions of them, and just understanding that there's a lot more complication to it than that. So I think Oppenheimer would be a great companion piece. And then of course one of my fun ones would be Oh Brother Where Art Thou, just because I love the film, but and it's a fun spin on a similar story. So I think that that would be my lighthearted one. But the other one, I think Oppenheimer and this would be a good double feature.
All I can say to that, Laron, is they turned him into a toad. Can't wait for Chris Nolan to make the sequel to Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Dan Bokemper, what would you recommend to listeners who are interested in the Odyssey?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many films that I could think of, and including within Nolan's own canon. I think Oppenheimer does pair super well with this, to Laron's point. Even the entire Dark Knight trilogy, I think, arguably, you've got an Odysseus-style figure a little bit. But the one that I keep thinking of when I was watching this, and especially as it relates to like something that is set up like to some extent a revenge thriller, but sort of in the Odyssey satisfies it to some extent, but it also works to rebuke the sensibility behind getting revenge, killing folks because you feel like you've been done wrong. In this film, it's not in a way, and we'll discuss this in a minute, but it's not in a way that feels great. Which is why I think it's also a cool way. It's cool that this is coming out the same year as, I presume, Dune Part 3 is also going to make us feel a little conflicted about feeling so validated to the point where we're going to be able to, slaughter and massacre folks and can convince ourselves that we're on the right side of history somehow, if they're even like ultimately.
So, Dan, what's the recommendation though? We're talking about Dune. Is the recommendation Dune?
No, not Dune 3. It's Pig. Pig, the Nicolas Cage starring film, directed by Michael Sarnowski, which I think was his first one. And again, I'm not actually super familiar with that filmmaker, but I do think this film does really well. It is like a John Wick style premise, but ultimately it's about forgiveness and learning to reconcile kind of emotionally with the decisions we've made in our life, and to know that even when we feel justified, meeting that with violence isn't going to solve anything. And I think that film does it excellently. I think this film actually considers that. And again,
inspired choice. Very good.
Yeah. But I would say Pig would be mine from 2021 or 20.
That sounds right. That sounds
like
right.
21. Yeah.
He's directing the Death Stranding movie, so I'm very eager to see how that turns out. Stay tuned. Yeah. I'm going to go with Triple Threat real fast. Big Fish. One of my favorite Tim Burton movies, incredibly underrated Tim Burton movie, a movie about the stories we pass down and how oftentimes the way we imagine them are different than the way they actually happen. And that's actually okay. And part of what makes storytelling so beautiful. Number one, Life of Pi, similar deal. Oftentimes we tell ourselves stories to understand and rationalize or really contextualize the experiences we have, whether they're beautiful or horrific or upsetting, by retelling stories in a new way that engages with the people, really passes the lessons down to the next generation. And lastly, this one was an interesting one. There was one sequence when I was trying to think about movies about legacy. One that came to mind, there was a specific sequence, the last scene of Gangs of New York. Gangs of New York is an imperfect Martin Scorsese movie, but it's one I like quite a bit. And I don't know if you recall the end of that movie, we see that they, Leo, they have the big duel and they all die. And you cut to New York in a wide shot where there's this big graveyard that gets overgrown, like speeds it up. And basically the sort of idea as there was entire cultures that went to war with each other in New York City, and they were all lost to the sands of time. New York as a city was still built up. They are the foundation that is still there. They're always there, but often forgotten. And it's another one of those like haunting moments where you're like, wow, all that happened and no one really even remembers these stories. So I bring up Gangs of New York because that is Martin Scorsese retelling a story about all the different immigrants that arrived to New York at a certain period of time and fought each other. Retelling that story to immortalize, like, this is what it was to build America. A lot of people all together. Anyway, another reflection on storytelling and why it's important for us to continue to tell these stories over and over again. Well, guys, a lot to talk about. If you do not want to be spoiled on the Odyssey, the thing that is over 1,000 years old, go ahead and tune out now.
What happens now?
Well, now, Lancelot, Galahad and I wait until nightfall and then leap out of the rabbit, taking the French by surprise. Not only by surprise, but totally unarmed.
Who leaps out?
Lancelot, Galahad, and I leap out of the rabbit, and look, if we built this large wooden badger.
Run away!
So, as I've already mentioned, the real spoilers are not within the plot. It is the way that Nolan frames the plot, and frames the characters. So, I think there are two, for me, there were two sort of like interconnected ideas that I think Nolan is really hitting home, and the finale that really recontextualizes the movie you just watched, and the mythology that we have all grown to understand. And the first is, what is the cost of violating the rules of society, or as they say, the gods in the movie? So when Odysseus first returns home, he goes back in disguise as a beggar, per the advice of the undead Agamemnon he speaks with halfway through the movie. And he speaks as a beggar to Penelope, and he tells his version of what happened at Troy, and he sort of reveals that Troy was not an honorable battle or victory, but a slaughter, in which his army used the commonly held belief in goodwill, something they refer to as the laws of Zeus or Zeus's law throughout the film multiple times. This was a gift that was supposed to be a sign of peace, and utilizing their hospitality, the fact that they were following Zeus's law. We treat every stranger as a guest in our house because they might become a god, an idea that is repeated multiple times throughout the film. That is how Odysseus and the Greeks defeated the Trojans. They took that rule and turned it against them. And the movie sort of attributes the breaking down of the natural order rooted in the betrayal of Odysseus, not only a betrayal of the Trojan commonly held beliefs, but a betrayal of his own beliefs. He is the one who is always talking about how important it is to be hospitable to guests, for example. So, I just want to turn to you guys first, and then I'll throw it to you first, Laron. I mean, how did you interpret the way they use sort of like the gods or Zeus's law, and Odysseus' reluctance to pay reverence to them throughout the film? What did you make of that?
Like, you mean his unwillingness to?
Yeah, at the beginning of the movie, he was blowing them off. Like,
yeah.
He literally fired an arrow at Poseidon's son. Yeah. He's like, he killed my guys.
It shows you again that frailty, that the flawedness of man. And I feel like in many ways, it's helping us understand that for him to fully surrender to all of that would mean losing sometimes. Would mean not getting everything that you want. And so him edging against that is like, look, we defeated this, we did this thing, but at what cost? You know what I mean? Like, at what cost? So yeah, you get to call yourself a hero. Yes, you're the victor in this scenario, but what does that actually mean to be victorious? Is that the slaughter and pillaging of all these people? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you got that. You achieved that. You got to advance. You obtained the goods you needed. You got the things, whatever that is, whatever the objective was moment to moment. But there is
you ended the war, and you ended the war,
but then you're carrying the weight of the inner emotional turmoil of that loss, and you're slowly chipping away at your own humanity, and then you're going forth and trying again, as we tell these stories over and over again. It was like, yeah, you're a hero, you did all the things. He's like, nah. He's so reluctant to go home. And so reluctant because he feels like a part of him died, every single time he did this. He's not who he was before. He's not standing for the ideals that he once was, projecting or upholding. And so it feels like this is an interesting way to talk about how there is no war that's justified. There is no murder that's justified. There is no, it's complicating that, you know what I mean? And I think that that's something that we as a society are seeing right now as American citizens, particularly, what it means and what choices we've made as a country have put us in the really unique and vulnerable position that we are in right now, where we still get to sit here and say America's great, but it also is built on the shoulders of so much carnage, human carnage. And I think that that's an important thing that this film is illuminating about this. Yes, we can say that he succeeded at what he did, but that then goes with a lot we have to reconcile with on our own personal self. And I think that that's kind of how I looked at some of the decisions he was making.
Yeah. No, I think that's well said. Dan, what did you make of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the fallacy that comes with glory and questioning the idea of glory itself and what that actually means and how many things you will find yourself justifying because, oh, people are going to talk about this for a while. People are going to see me as a hero and immortalize me, and it doesn't matter. I can, again, commit some violence. So what if I'm going to kill a few folks? So what if I do this that ends up costing me so many men? People are going to remember this, and very, very progressively, you start to lose all of that. Like you start to see how even Odysseus himself is tired of that. And I think the interpretation of the gods as well. To speak to that a little bit more directly, they feel very terrestrial. I think it's interesting that they make them very human. Athena doesn't have a flaming spear or emerge from the heavens or anything. She just shows up. She's just there. And I do think that like Zendaya is a very good casting choice to just show this, like, she's got that look and there is
She's good at being stoic, but also stoic, but you can read the emotional weight on her face.
Exactly. That's what I mean. And to be a god and show that is very interesting. To see a god that to some extent they seem, I know it's, Zeus is striking down men and Poseidon in combination with that are, when the men are out at sea, and they're kind of into the god's realm, so to speak, and they're being subject to storms and things like that. But even those can make the gods seem a little weak and limited in what they can actually do. And I think it's like Odysseus is both realizing that, and initially it's something he can rebuke and sort of question and challenge and put against because, he's like, I'm on a roll. I'm carving my legend. I might outlive, these gods in a lot of ways because maybe I'm a god myself. And to have that even if Odysseus is that motherfucker who is more prominent than any god could eventually be and more notable and a story we understand more and something we model after, to see him in a light in which he knows, oh, that's not a good thing. Actually, I need to have references because if these being both these humans who I'm around and then also these gods that are revealing actively their frailty. And I just love that sequence of the statue of Athena getting decapitated because it just tells you that it's that these gods.
It's the thesis statement for the whole
movie.
movie.
Absolutely. These gods can be removed. This history, this glory we have, all of these things, these supposed codes that we were going to live by. We throw those aside so easily whenever we feel validated to do so. Especially
at what cost? And at what cost? Though, there's a cost, though. It's like these are what made Greece. The idea being like part of what made Greece the culture of Greece so rich and it's had the impact it had, and the prosperity it had at a time was because there were these codes and laws that people lived by, or at least liked to aspire to. And I think what Nolan is doing here is like, when did that fall? Well, that fell after Troy, and that's because the Greeks broke the law. They turned against the principles and values they said they stood for in order to achieve a victory over for really dumb reasons. Honestly, just went to war for a woman, and obviously there's more to it than that. But I think a thing that stuck out to me, especially I think about like his arc in the movie, Odysseus. At the beginning, he really doesn't care about the gods. I think he blows off. They're like, oh wait, why did you attack the Cyclops? That's Poseidon's son. Now it's going to put a curse on us in the ocean. And then whether or not there is an actual Poseidon ruling over him in the ocean, it gets in the heads of all of the men that, oh my God, we're cursed and that these bad things happen to them. So whether or not like there's a real cause and effect there, I think that there is very psychological impact upon these men. Odysseus at first he feels so arrogant and confident that he can outsmart them because that's what they did at Troy. So he's like, oh, you kill one of my men, I'm going to fire back at you, and we see time and time again throughout the first half of the movie where he's rebuking the gods. You're saying, so what? Even after he talks to the dead, and like, you're going to pass the sirens, don't listen. He's like, all right, guys, tie me up. I got to hear the sirens, like he does not learn the lesson until finally his men all die. And he's like, that's where he has the moment, I think, where he's like, I think the gods were right. I think there was a cost to this. And that's why that's why he stays on Calypso's Isle for like, was it 7 years or whatever?
7 years. Yep.
And he doesn't want, he has this like internal realization. He's like, I healed your body, but I couldn't heal your mind.
Yeah.
I could tell you weren't ready to go home. He had kind of come to terms with his sins a little bit and confronted and was so ashamed of them that he didn't want to go home.
Yeah.
And I also think that, sort of where this takes us is this is a cultural breakdown. It's not just war. I mean, that's a big part of it, obvious in this context. War is the violation, but it's also the betrayal of cultural norms that are agreed upon by everyone. Oh, you guys are done. You surrendered. Here's a gift. This means we're making peace with you. Oh, yeah, and then you let us into your home. And what did we do? We burned your house down. That's sort of the way the culture unravels after that. We see this even in Ithaca. Like the people who are back in Ithaca are just they're still reaping the benefits of a prosperous Greece, but they've lost all the values. The suitors are trying to kick beggars out of the hall. There's no appreciation or passing down of these traditions that have made Greece a great place and a great culture.
The foundation for why,
Yeah.
So it's not even just happening on the. It's not even just happening on the. It's a war. This is a cultural unraveling that is passing through the psychology of the people who live in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like we established such a powerful society only to make the most nearsighted, approach to hoard everything and try and just cut everyone out, by their knees essentially, or from the knees. And it's just so, it seems to be about a lot of things that are relevant right now. And again, this idea that patriotism, really, it's not, we don't have that glory. Nothing maintains.
Well, notice they didn't go to war for Greece. They went to war for Agamemnon. I mean, like Odysseus did not even want to go, but he's like, man, if I don't go to war for this guy, I mean, he sacrificed his own daughter as a sacrifice to the gods. What do you think he's going to do to me if I tell him I can't go?
Yeah,
I mean, I guess what did you guys think about sort of maybe how these ideas sort of tie into Oppenheimer? Because Laron, I think you nailed it. This is a great follow-up to Oppenheimer for a lot of reasons. Maybe you want to elaborate on that a little bit more?
Well, he's created like in Oppenheimer, he's created this something that can destroy, a weapon of war. This is the entirety of that, and in understanding that how obsessively important this was for him to accomplish. Not thinking about what it would ever be used for and why and how, and in the wrong hands. And so you have this complication of this obsessive, like kind of almost narcissistic quality where you're like, I have to accomplish this to feel validated in myself.
Right.
But I'm not thinking about how this thing is going to again, the collateral damage of the creation of this, and in many ways, like a lot of decisions that Odysseus is making throughout this story, are things of his own creation, conflicts of his own creation that are mounting up with each episode until he's left alone to kind of like feel the full weight of his poor choices in the people that have been lost as a direct link to his decisions, a direct consequence of those. And so I feel like that's the interesting, fun thematic parallel here is that these characters mean well. Odysseus isn't a bad man, but he is a man who has made very selfish choices that didn't serve the larger cause. They served him in the moment, And so, and sometimes again, when we're not selfless and we don't think of others, when our decisions are all in the service of ourselves, then we see this, we see the damage, in front of us. And I think that there's just a beautiful, comparison there between the two of these figures in the two of these movies.
Yeah. That's well said.
Yeah, I really love that duality that you can have, like Oppenheimer objectively doing a impressive thing, pushing science beyond, the limits that even Einstein was able to reach, and pushing that further. That is impressive. The same thing with Odysseus doing heroic deeds, almost
being very clever,
being
clever and using their laws against them to win.
Yeah.
Impressive.
Doing things. Yeah. Becoming more than just a mortal man, in a lot of ways we think, that is really cool and impressive. And we lean on that for so many tropes and for so many heroes that we see throughout media. I mean, Batman is a good example, somebody who is so clever and can outsmart people so well and so consistently. But yeah, to your point, Laron, those people can also be heroes to some extent, or can be geniuses, or can be masterminds, and can be, or not masterminds, but geniuses, and can be, something more than human and do something that feels so out of reach until they showed us that it wasn't for a lot of us. But those results can still be devastating and horrifying
on a generational level. Like, it's not just, this is going to affect my immediate family. It's going to affect Ithaca moving forward. It's going to affect it's going to affect the ideals we've upheld that made us great, all because I was selfish in the moment. And you know what I mean? Like, and it just shows you also just how fragile those systems are. And how they can break down as soon as we get one character that cares about none of them.
Well, that's and that's. I mean, I think that's my big add-on is I think what Odysseus and Oppenheimer have in common is they're both geniuses who outsmarted the problem. They were given a problem statement and they outsmarted it, but they outsmarted it these are transgressions. You're transgressing against laws, commonly held laws and principles that you share with the Trojans. You're dehumanizing them. You're breaking those rules because your goal is more important than those same cultural principles you say you stand for. With Oppenheimer, he's transgressing. It's like, well, that's cool. You can do this, but you're transgressing the natural order. This is not a natural thing you're building. It's not to say it's impossible, but you're building a thing that is going to create an entire world of fear. Your genius is coming at the cost of other lives, other people, sacrifices that you can't take back. And I think that's true for both of them. I kind of look at them as both as men that make like transgressions that they have not considered the cost or the outcomes that are out
the
there.
larger implications of them.
Exactly.
Like, what is this thing? Once you accomplish it, what do you do with it? You get bragging rights, but what do you do with it? There's only one thing that can be done with this, and that is destruction. So is it worth it? And that's the question you have to ask yourself,
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to bring back here to Dan, just to give us some space. You're talking about your issues sort of with the way that Odysseus takes out the suitors. And so I want to dig into that a little bit. I personally feel like there's a bit of a nuance there. He views the, and this is what I was trying to get at earlier. He views the way the suitors and the way they are operating as a larger cultural outcome of his transgression. So in his light, he sees this as I'm cleaning up my mistakes so that my son can have a chance at a fresh slate.
Yeah. And I totally get that. And I think that's pretty clear is what Nolan's intent is like, oh, I got to come full circle. I need to, close this loop, so to speak. I need to clean it. Does still feel a little bizarre that the way that you do have to solve that, like what other way was he going to do but kill all of them essentially.
Jason Bourne style in ancient Greece. Yes,
very much. And it was cool. Like there's almost there, and again, there's a part of me that kind of wishes we got
so thrilling just the way the weapons are coming down.
It's an awesome action sequence. Yeah, there's like really it's a really it's a cool sequence, and I want it. I almost wanted more of it. The person who wants to sit on the edge of their seat and loves being kind of like stressed out about movies, but loves those like tense action sequences. And again, those
also Robert Pattinson in the corner, be like, get him now! All the spears, get the spears! Oh my god,
he doesn't pick just one weapon. He doesn't pick the one weapon. They got to fight for him.
Yeah. And that's
very satisfying though to hear him.
It is. It's, right, and you needed to see those comeuppance, and I think it makes sense. It is, again, it just results in the film sits in your stomach in a way that isn't going to be 100% right, which I think is a good. Again, I alluded to Dune Part 3. I'm going to assume this film, unless I'm just completely wrong about Villeneuve's vision. I don't think I am, but it's going to sit in a way that feels weird, and I'm glad that blockbusters are doing that. And I think it's hard to process, and it's like, I don't think so. But I think within the context of the film, I think that's why literally as soon as Odysseus is done slaughtering all of these suitors, the first thing to Penelope isn't, all right, taking my kingdom back. Let's get this show back on the road. I'm finally in my righteous place. We need to go. We need to get out of here.
Well, he's like, because he goes back to, I owe my men. Like, I didn't bury them properly. Again, I did not follow the laws of Zeus. I did not bury them properly. I have also, like, who I am, I do not deserve to rule this kingdom. And I have forfeited so many of these principles that I once had when I did rule that I no longer have. And on top of that, he's got a son now who's like, I think sort of feel like this is his chance to like make right what I didn't do, or at least give him the opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It was.
I think and one thing I want to add that I think it makes abundantly clear is and at first I thought it's almost kind of comical. It's like the 2-story. You've got Odysseus in the feast hall just killing I think 30 people, and then you have Telemachus struggling to kill the goon, who's just like
useless.
Throwing but he does it. But it's also to show like Telemachus doesn't have that killer instinct that really was the problem. And I think Odysseus, at least in the interpretation of Odysseus that Nolan gives us, is that he recognizes that I'm not really good for this society either. And I like that it ends on that. And
he Joe Biden did and said, I need to step in.
And the final shot speaks to that. His biggest glory, his most clever of clever boy things, the Trojan horse. It is a symbol of destruction, and maybe it's better if we forget about it.
Well, no. I don't think he is suggesting that you don't talk about Troy. In fact, I think that's kind of the closing thesis. This is why it's really important.
When I say forget it, I mean not
recontextualize it.
Yes.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. So again, the film's final moments come after Odysseus vanquishes the suitors. And then Odysseus and Penelope decide to exile themselves by heading west to remember his men. They leave Ithaca behind for Telemachus to rule, gives him a clean slate. And then at the very final moments, though, Penelope states that a new world, that basically the world is heading into a dark age. However, there will be a new dawn, which is really, really cool symbolism with the riding into the sunset. And although they're going to have of this past from this before this dark age are the stories we've told and that we passed down. And Odysseus sort of implies that the lessons behind the stories should be remembered, but also he's not like, oh, they will be remembered. He says, I hope they remember it so they don't make the same mistakes that we made, is kind of the gist of it, with the final shot being on the horse. So anyway, before we jumped into that, I just want to provide some context for how we got to this part of the discussion for listeners. But the final shot is the horse at Troy burning. And so Dan, anyway, I just want to turn it back to you. Like, when you think about the horse being that final shot, what is that significance for you?
Yeah, recontextualizing is the perfect word. It's these things can still, there can still be some recognition of glory. We can still see that, these things were heroic, but at the same time, we need to understand how devastating the consequences were and how, these things ultimately do lead to restriction. I do think there is an element of rebirth, and seeing it right now, time is going to tell if whether or not that might feel a little overly optimistic, but at the same time, what else can you do but hope that the world is going to get better? And that it is actually a good thing that they set
and provide them with the things they need to go forth and make those decisions should they choose to. And having them there, I look at that final image in it's just similar to the decapitation of the statue, like as a visual essay of how these two contradictory things exists in the same space. You have this thing, and but the flames and the fire and everything, you can feel the the rot and of the bodies in even though they're not on camera, you can kind of feel that oppressive kind of thing, with this very serene image. But it's like, yes, we accomplished something, but it's not all peace and glory after that. There's so much that we have to rebuild about it, both externally in the world, but also within ourselves, about what all those choices did and where they brought us to. So
we have to remember, like, ultimately, and that's Yeah, Odysseus' whole thing is that recognizing.
Well, I just think I just interpret. I took it as more of a. For me, I'm more of a haunting ending than an optimistic one. I think it's more of a haunting in that, like, it's cautionary. It's we're gonna tell these stories. Will they learn the right lessons from the story? All we can do is tell them,
Right.
And I think, and that's what makes this interesting. Nolan telling this version of the Odyssey today. Growing up in high school, we didn't learn that. We didn't learn that version of the Odyssey. We did not think about the consequences of Troy. It was always like, oh yeah, Odysseus was a smart guy who outsmarted the Trojans, and that's how they won.
He won everything. Yeah.
Nothing bleak about it originally
Right.
at all.
So it's like, how were they? All we can do as the generation that's on our way out is tell people these stories that happen and hope that they take the right lessons. And that's
it's
where
like
I get.
It's an oral tradition in many ways. It's like we're passing down these stories. We don't know how they're going to interpret them 10 years from now. But this is our take on it at this particular moment in our society, in our world. This is how we're viewing this text now, and what that's there. Because again, whatever the objective was for telling this story initially, like there's something to glean from it, from these choices, as it relates into our real world. So.
Well, and that's where, and Dan, I'll throw it back to you, but like you're talking about sort of why is this the movie Christopher Nolan chose to make? It's pretty clear at this point in time.
Right.
He could have made any movie he wanted to make, and he made a movie, a classic that everyone knows. Everyone read this in a high school, at least in the United States. I imagine most countries, or at least Western countries, I should say. This is a story we all know. And it's taking us back to a story we all know in a way we've never seen it in terms of the spectacle and the visuals and production value. And then it's pushing us to this point of like, have we been reading this story the wrong way the whole time? Are we forgetting that the Greek society essentially spiraled into a dark age after this and we don't know what happened next? Have we forgotten that? And when you think about, the comparisons to where we're at in America today, he casted, like I said, Matt Damon is an American. When you cast Matt Damon as an American, that's a very specific choice. And also, I think it plays really well into why we have this very multicultural cast, because in this case, you cast Matt Damon in as Odysseus, an American, because this is a stand-in for America.
Yeah,
you have a diverse
makes it relatable
cast
to us. Yeah, it makes the story about us. It helps frame it in a context that we understand. Instead of making us removed from it. Oh, it's a mythical story. Oh, it's this thing that happened. It's like, no, here are faces and people that look like the world. Like, what does it say? What does it say to us personally? And I think that was a very intentional choice. I agree with the choice, and I see how effective the choice is. So I'm the critics that want to hold this to that thing are missing the point of why Nolan is telling this story.
They aren't good faith critics. I think that whole thing's a bad faith argument. I actually think, but it's one of those, like, I'm like, well, I guess I could see how you could not really make that argument. Really, I think it's a dumb argument, but like, I'm like, because none of this is real.
It's like you just.
real.
But I'm like, but let's just entertain the thought and say, oh, it's weird that there's a bunch of multiracial people in this one country. I'm like, no. That's the point, because it's America. America is a multicultural melting pot that has passed our prime. We have sacrificed the values that we hold dear, both overseas and within the halls of our politics. What is the cost of these transgressions? I think Christopher Nolan is convinced we are either on the brink of or in the process of a cultural collapse. And that is why he's telling the story right now. We are at the point where we are spiraling into a dark age for a lot of reasons I won't get into. It's not great.
This is the movie I think that Francis Ford Coppola was trying to make with Michael Boss.
Yes.
I think that's like the cautionary tale he was telling in the nonsensical way, incomprehensible way that he did. This is a more synthesized version of, I think, some of the themes that were in that movie and what I think he was trying to get at least he said in his interviews. So I feel like Nolan understood that more, and the fact that he's able to distill all of that context and that history and those themes in a movie like this, is pretty remarkable, coming off of just, having his first Best Picture, Best Director, in his filmography. And this one, in some ways, again, feels like a great companion piece to that. So
Yeah, I think it's also interesting. He made Oppenheimer about the invention of the nuclear bomb, also a story about America, more on the nose. And then he makes this movie that is the story of America as the myth,
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
looking back to what was one of the other pinnacles of culture and the human history story. And I think it's really incredible and profound, thought-provoking, all the things, how he's putting this out there. And it's asking us, at least as Americans, like, what have we lost? And I'm not even just talking about, there's actual wars, which I think is a very important question we should be asking ourselves every day. We're in a couple of wars right now that no one wants to be in, and we ask ourselves what's going on. But also, I would take it a step further in our politics. And it's not even a right or left. There's no good faith. There's no good faith efforts in order to serve the people, to follow the actual principles that were in the Constitution. And listen, I'm not like trying to get on the politics soapbox, but I definitely think that is pretty there in terms of like why Christopher Nolan is doing with the Odyssey. There have been transgressions made by everybody in order to win. Winning is more important than actually living out your values. And what is that costing us? That is how we got where we're at today. And I think the question this movie is asking is like, what are we going to do and pass on to people, either the next generation of people in our lifetime, or even like in the history of the human myth? Where's America going to fall on that? That's, as an American, that is how I read the text and sort of the questions he's asking.
It's going to take a strong degree of introspection that I don't think some people have the capacity to do.
Yeah.
But I do think that it doesn't mean it's not worth sounding the alarm and saying and speaking it out and talking about it in any corner that we can, even if it is through the lens and the context of a podcast about a movie. Like it's an important conversation to have. As a culture, as a society, I think as a human race, really, to be honest with you, because I mean, I look at it as the world is on fire, and I mean, from a scientific, climate change level as well, and we're internally fighting ourselves or eating each other. We're cannibalizing ourselves on the planet and not realizing that we could make this world more habitable, more equitable, more inclusive to so many different sides, and where everyone gets a seat at the table, and it's not what I can get that I can remove from someone else in exchange of that. It's what can we share together. And I think that I think at the heart of this is, again, losing those ideals, whatever those are for us as a society here.
And yes, we're talking about America today, and I think Christopher Nolan definitely has America on his mind when he's talking about, but these are also the same patterns of behavior we can see throughout the entire human history and the human story and the human the mythology of humans on this planet. It's crazy that Christopher Nolan was able to get to that scope and ask such big questions that I think whether it's America in 2026 or some other country in 2785.
Yeah, ancient Greece and whatever. It's like,
we can watch the movie and be like, well, yeah, there's something here. That's relevant.
This exactly. We're telling the same stories. We're telling the same stories because we're not learning from them, And so.
Well, so why? Let's bring us. Oh, Dan, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and I think you guys are hitting it, but one thing that I do kind of want to stress is, and as hopeless as as what I'm about to say can seem, it's not impossible. And I think Nolan is really getting at this with Odysseus, especially, and with having such a powerful figure, is that a lot of, I think, correcting things. And what does that even look like? There's so many different problems, and there are so many different potential ways to solve them, or for them to go catastrophically wrong and continue to destroy us, continue to destroy ourselves. But I think the point is that those with power do have to refute it a bit. They do have to relinquish it. And I think that's ultimately what Odysseus does. And no matter how powerful you are in the nation you lead, you do have to find ways to use that for something that does support life and does reduce harm. And again, conflicting ending, but I do think Odysseus realizes that, no, I have done so much damage. I have to leave. I have to pay my respects, but I have to minimize this throughout the entirety of my
If
existence.
we're gonna have a chance at change, then I have to
Mhm.
remove myself from
Right.
this.
And
Because once again, the Robert Pattinson, his character is a symptom of this again, like this cult. Like again, you go back to the transgression he makes at the beginning of the movie. Robert Pattinson trades his lots he drew with a different kid. Like again, that's what I'm talking about. It's these small cultural things that permeate the entire nation or island of Ithaca.
And there's a sense of entitlement too. There's a sense of like who we are, and to compare it to America and certain people in America, and maybe even beyond America, certain people who just happen to have a ridiculous amount of wealth. I had this, I have it because I deserved it. I am in this opportunity. I'm in this position.
Well, or I won. I won.
I won.
I think winning is the goal. I mean, that's one of the first lines Odysseus has when he's talking to Calypso. He's like, "We won the war, right?" And it's like, "Well, yeah, you won the war, but so what?"
And we use these things. We use these words like win and lose to imply, and it's like, but this isn't a fucking game to win. It never was. It never was. We can live happily. We can live comfortably. We can have things we want to have. We can buy things we want to buy. But if it comes at devastating humanity, who cares about winning? And right now, I think what Nolan is trying to convey is we have people who are very obsessed with that without actually knowing at all what it even means. Because if they did, we'd lose that obsession, I think, pretty quickly. And whether or not people are realizing it, who knows?
Well, and I guess it's not just Odysseus. It's also not just Odysseus. I actually think Agamemnon is a really good driver. Is a real driver of that. And it's funny, he gets back. It's funny, he gets home no problem, and then gets murdered because his own family hates him because he has betrayed them.
Well, and that's why that's why Odysseus is interesting, is because Agamemnon is the perfect example of that, and he's like damn near faceless in the film. Like obviously, like you see him, but he's not like a real character. He is almost this kind of just symbol, a symbol for something that's broken, that doesn't even realize it's broken.
Well, he's the driving force behind the war.
Right, and it's not. He is not actualized. Odysseus becomes actualized, and that's I definitely think that's why he's getting that. So it does also make sense that Odysseus has to go through some shit without dying to reach that actualization. And dang, it's so cool to see something that could have been just a heroic, and it probably would have still been okay in a different lens, that it is just about heroism and producing it in a more traditional way, but it's not. And obviously it wouldn't be, a Nolan film if he didn't at least try to challenge us a little bit. So, yeah.
I mean, I think there's a lot that Nolan's putting out there, a lot to think about, a lot to talk about that people are going to be looking to talk about for years to come, I think. Well, gentlemen, I think we are about out of time. Thank you for going on this Odyssey with us. Listeners, I hope we didn't get too heavy in the end there for you. But again, that just speaks to where Christopher Nolan is willing to go and the kinds of questions he's willing to have us ask ourselves, both on an individual level, but also on a macro level. Dan Bokemper, thanks for jumping aboard this Odyssey at a moment's notice. Where can people find you and all your work online?
Yeah. So Instagram would be broken_dandy. And then, of course, the Cinematropolis on podcasts like these periodically. And then over on Flick Attack, writing periodic reviews there as well. I think I'm due for a few more, so need to put some out. But yeah, wherever you, hopefully you're finding your film criticism at the Cinematropolis mostly. And again, like I said at the start, I am inevitable, so you'll.
All right.
As long as Caleb
inevitably go to the cinematropolis.com. That's what I gotta say. Laron Chapman, where can people find you and your work online?
They can follow me here on the cinematropolis.com for more podcasts. Also, I have a review column, Real Insights with Laron Chapman. I also now recently started writing for the Oklahoma Gazette. I write one review for them a month. And you can follow me on Letterboxd as well under the handle Black_Cinna_man.
Excellent stuff. You can find me on all the channels, C Masters Talk. That's letter C Masters Talk, Instagram, Letterboxd. But you can also just head to thecinematropolis.com for more podcasts like these. Do me a favor, if you enjoyed this show, seriously, I know I ask for it and it feels like cliche. Please go subscribe to YouTube and please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts if you listen this far. Tells me you are bought in. buy in for 30 more seconds by going on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and liking, giving us a review. Or if you're watching on YouTube, subscribing to the channel and giving the video a like would go a long way and help us get discovered by more listeners like you. Well, guys, we got one more banger in terms of blockbusters left for the summer. The month of August is relatively cool, but if you want to look for spectacle, we couldn't get out of it without one more superhero. But that's one I think we might be kind of excited about. Catch us again next time when we're reviewing Spider-Man Brand New Day. Until next time.